Welcome to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
And what's up, STS Nation? Welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And when it comes to the so-called Idaho 4, the Bryan Kohberger case, I can guarantee you this: you are not going to get a better panel than this anywhere on planet Earth. So we're going to dive into it right away. Appreciate everybody being here. Back in June, a judge laid out a plan for Bryan Kohberger, the man suspected of fatally stabbing 4 University of Idaho students in 2022, to stand trial. He will stand trial beginning in June 2025. That is now less than 1 year away. The trial set to begin officially June 2nd, 2025. And now there's some legal wranglings going on with possible change of venue. We're going to get to Kevin Fixler from the Idaho Statesman on that. Speaking of that, he is the 2-time Idaho Reporter of the Year. He is Kevin Fixler, an investigative reporter with the Idaho Statesman. He earned that distinction, the 2-time Reporter of the Year, in large part because of his incomparable work on the Moscow murders. He has been following the gruesome story from the very beginning and even traveled out to Bryan Kohberger's home. Then you've got the 2 men who've written a book on this case prior to the trial, the only 2 men. Howard Bloom is an American author and journalist, formerly a reporter for the Village Voice and the New York Times. He is a contributing editor at Vanity Fair and the author of several nonfiction books, including the New York Times bestseller and Edgar Award winner American Lightning. His new book is When the Night Comes Falling. It takes an in-depth look at the murders. Here is the book cover. If you haven't gone out, if you're a true crime fan, you're interested in this story, that is Howard Bloom's new book out right now. And then another author, we've got J. Reuben Appelman. His book, While Idaho Slept, tells the horrific story of the University of Idaho murders that gripped the world's attention from Moscow, Idaho, back in November of 2022. He is, J. Reuben Appelman, a true crime writer. He wrote the very well-known book, The Kill Jar, published by Gallery and Simon Schuster back in 2018, and that inspired the Hulu docuseries Children of the Snow. So 2 very accomplished writers, and this is the cover of J. Reuben Appelman. He's like, where the hell's my cover? There it is, right there. While Idaho Slept. So we've got both covers, and I will put them back up periodically. Anytime we do this story, I obviously like to think of the victims in this case. Kaylee Gonzalez, Maddie Mogan, who we're going to be talking about specifically today, Xana Kernodle, and of course her boyfriend Ethan Chapin. You see them on the screen, gone way too soon, not even close to being in the prime of their lives. 4 beautiful young college students taken from us. Horrific circumstances. People chiming in, Wildfire already telling us, Howard Bloom, I love your book.
Thank you.
Yes, and I'm not jealous.
We can stop there. That's enough.
Yeah. So my book has about close coming up on 80 reviews. Howard's has 500 and something. Not that I'm keeping count, but if you've read my book, you better leave a review. That's all I got to say. So, Fix, let's bring people up to date here. This is Kevin Fixler. Again, the trial set to start June 2nd of 2025. And there was a court proceeding, or at least a motion filed just recently. Thank you very much. There was a court proceeding, or a motion, I should say, for a change of venue. What is the latest? What's going on here?
So Bryan Kohberger's defense team has for months had tipped that they would be asking for a change of venue outside of Latah County, which site of Moscow where the crime took place. And they had a deadline of Monday to file the specific justification for that. And they met that deadline. Here in Idaho, we have a website many of the true crime fans follow, just as well as local media and national media. for case updates and these motions. And it basically says they are, they do want that. They will have a hearing on August 29th is what it's scheduled. That's been moved a few times, but currently August 29th to justify that. So far, the prosecution opposes that. That's what they've stated. And the sort of the news of this was the support information in that filing, which includes a bunch of survey data that kind of was controversial, and we can kind of get into that if you want to. But the news out of it really, though, was that they want it moved to Boise, Ada County. And before, it wasn't clear where they were going to ask. There was some discussion that it could be in East Idaho, just to try to get out of the area where there's been either media saturation, at least alleged, and juror bias that's been produced as a result. But specifically in this document, they said they want to move it to Boise, which, as you know, is the same courtroom and courthouse as the two Daybell trials were held as well.
Yep, sure. I'm aware of that. And of course, there's a death penalty potentially by firing squad in Idaho. Jay Rubin, you're in, and we're going to get to Howard Bloom in a moment. Fix just dropped. Oh, that was Jay just dropped out for a quick second. But Jay, you're in Boise, I believe, or you're in Idaho. What's the sense on the ground now? I can tell just from our numbers, which when it comes to big cases like this, are really irrelevant to me, but they've dipped a little bit from the height of this case. Seems like there's a lull right now. What is the feeling or the sense in Idaho regarding this case? Is there the same sort of media frenzy, or are we kind of in a lull right now?
Well, it's an interesting question. It's like very layered for me. First of all, I think Fixler is better at reporting on numbers and things like that. So you might want to ask him. But I'm a mile from the courthouse is where my base is. So if this trial does get moved to Boise, I'll be there every day covering the trial. What that means to you guys, I'm not sure. Does that mean reporting for a local newspaper? I don't know. Does it mean sitting there with my moleskin every day? I don't know. But I feel at this point, my personal opinion is that the trial should be moved if you want a fair trial. I think that I'm opening up a can of worms here by saying this probably, but I think that if you're going to have the same standard of justice you have across the board in all kinds of major cases like this, then the trial should be moved to get a potential fairer jury pool. If it is moved, I'll be there all the time. What's the sense of things on the ground? Like, I love you and I love your show, and you're an amazing person, and you have a huge heart. But that's such an outside question. Like, the sense is that, like, what anybody says, it's like asking a family, what's the sense you have now after your child has been missing for the last year and a half? Idaho feels like a family to those who actually live here. There's a communal sense of mourning. Are people talking about their mourning every day? Not necessarily. Are they doing little things every day to get through their mourning? Absolutely. Are they doing like what I'm doing, or what Howard must be doing, or Kevin, or you, when you dip into this dark content year after year after year to get through your mourning? Yeah, you do little things here and there. Do you talk about always what's the hard thing? Not necessarily. But that's what's going on here in Idaho right now, I think, is that there's a lot of chatter that happens around court dates and hearings and things like that. But overall, people are sitting with their mourning, and you don't necessarily know where they're at in that process.
Very well put. And as they always say in true crime, there is no such thing as closure. There will never be closure for the families in this case. There will be continued pain and suffering, and I can only hope that it gets mitigated over time. That's it. But this is Jay Rubin's book right here, While Idaho Slept, and I have not had a chance to read Howard Bloom's book, When the Night Comes Falling, which Fix already told me is a Bob Dylan lyric, which is not surprising, but it comes from Bob Dylan apparently. So let's jump into this, Howard. You've got the latest book, and Kevin Fixler informed me that your timeline in your book is a little bit different for when law enforcement first identified Bryan Kohberger. Kevin Fixler who's kind of led the reporting on this, had December 19th, I believe 2022, as the date where.
And that's what the New York Times says too.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, I disagree, and I've found more confirmation for it. And something Kevin, who has covered this brilliantly. I mean, he's the authority in all this. I say that in my book too. I say it behind his back and to his face. He talks about how the real question of this case is ultimately going to be, or one of the large questions is going to be, the DNA evidence. And did the FBI do something perhaps is going to be raised, go beyond the bounds of what is strictly legal by going to DNA sites that the FBI does not have ready access to. I point out, or from my sources, that the FBI identified Kohberger as a person of interest December 11th, before he left to go across country. The FBI at this point doesn't tell the Moscow task force that they have this person of interest, or that they are going to follow him across country. I think Jay also talks about the FBI following Kohberger across country in his book too. He confirms that too, if I remember correctly. Why didn't the FBI share this with the Moscow police force? Well, one reason would be perhaps that at this point, investigative genetic genealogy was not accepted readily into a courtroom. They wanted to be able to not say that was a reason for their identification. I think Kevin raises a point without even perhaps being aware of it, but he tacitly raises a point that the FBI might have done something underhanded, that they were very concerned about how they got to this identification, that they used identification from DNA websites that they're not allowed to access. Anyway, I contend, and my sources have said, that on December 11th, they get involved as identifying Kohberger as a person of interest. Another reason why they might not have done this is a more cynical reason, but they wanted the credit. They wanted the credit for the arrest. But once they realized that this was going to be an investigation that was going to go across country, that the Pennsylvania state troopers would have to get involved, and also that they had screwed up at parts during the investigation, they wanted the Moscow task force involved. But that's the difference that I make, I think, with the standard timeline that Kevin has quoted and that the New York Times has quoted. Is that right, Kevin? Or?
That date, the December 19th one that you cite in your book, that's actually not a date that I specifically have, but I do know that the New York Times has reported that was the earliest that Moscow police were aware. And I believe there are some police records that suggest that. But there again, I mean, one of the things I found most interesting about your work was the date of December 11th. And I think that presents the opportunity for the FBI to track Kohberger, which is a conversation you and I have had, and I wrote a story about and included a comment from you about it. The FBI denied this more than once to me, that they had any involvement in either the two traffic stops of Kohberger in Indianapolis, which was one by state police and one by the local sheriff's office in that community, and also that they were involved in this at all. And what's interesting to me—
And just to interrupt for a second, I agree with that the FBI had no involvement in the traffic stops. They were as blindsided as the Kohbergers were. Those traffic stops, I think you did the first original research that pointed out that they were drug interdiction cases, that they used the sort of thin excuse that the Kohberger's car was following another truck too closely to pull over the out-of-state license plate to see what was up.
Well, Howard, that seems like a huge coincidence, though. They're stopped within like 10 or 20 minutes of each other, right?
9 minutes, actually, within each other. And it's more than a huge coincidence. It seems to be an impossible coincidence, and yet Kevin's reporting and my reporting, I don't know about Jay's, has shown that it was true. The FBI had no knowledge of this. In fact, when the FBI, and I recreate the scene in my book. You know, they're watching this go down. They've got a plane up in the sky, and they don't know what to do. Should they intervene? This is a big decision, because if in fact this man who's a person of interest is a quadruple killer, well, then they're putting the deputy and the state trooper who are making these arrests in jeopardy unless they do something. They decide, though, finally to back down and see how this plays out. And fortunately, it plays out without incident.
Yeah. Oh, well, Jay, come into this conversation. I don't know. That's some weird feedback going on with me. But what would be the significance here, in your opinion, Jay, with Howard Bloom's reporting of the timeline actually being bumped up, that law enforcement identified him about 8 days earlier on December 11th as opposed to December 19th? You're a private eye as well, I should point out for people. But what would be the significance, in your opinion, with that reporting, that he was actually kind of a made man 8 days before the rest of the people out there reporting this?
Well, I also believe that he was a person of interest before the official timeline, or whatever we're calling it. I'm not remembering the dates offhand. What I do believe is that this opens up another bigger question, which is, like, here we are discussing something that, like, what was it? Some writer said, arguing about facts. His father used to say. We're not arguing, but it's like, soon enough we'll know exactly everything, or we won't. The FBI has no reason to necessarily tell, Kevin the truth, no reason to necessarily tell me the truth, or Howard the truth, or, they're under no obligation to give away certain details of their investigation. If they say to you, yes, on the record, we didn't know anything about this, maybe that's the truth, maybe it isn't. We've sort of bent the truth and lies sort of standard over the last few years, and things change. What we will find out is whatever they want to give us in court. But the bigger question to me is, does any of this speak to the sort of heart of the matter in this case, which is, and I don't think it necessarily does. Like, these are some details that are of interest. Of course, we need to report them. When do we report them? Well, like, for instance, my book came out, then Howard's came out, and people are still saying, well, we are discussing something that we don't know anything about necessarily until the end. But when do you report on war, for instance? Do you report after day one? Do you report after day 3? Do you report 6 months in, 4 years in? We have to report all the way along throughout the war, right? And so I don't know exactly what what we'll find about this particular timeline, but I do think that the bigger questions become. I mean, we get fixated on, was that person right about this detail or not? The bigger question is, did Howard's book convey the heart of and the longing and the heartbreak? And from what I can tell, it did. Did mine? Yes. And maybe we'll get in the weeds about dates and stuff. I'm not sure that matters to me anyway.
Yeah.
But
And
let me just say, Kevin, though, hit on something in his most recent reporting about how the FBI's evidence might be impugned, and the whole case could be balanced on that if they did something illegal or quasi-legal to get the genetic genealogy information. This would be a reason, if it's true, why they would have not been candid with Kevin or with me or with any reporter about when they first got onto the case. And if it is true, as Kevin points out, I think, if I'm quoting you correctly, it has the potential to pull the whole case asunder. It could lead to a dismissal of the charges against Kohberger. Is that somewhat
that makes sense about getting in detail with that. It's funny. I don't think anybody believes that if Kohberger were any other person in any other case, that he would get off on some strange technicality that we've not speculated on yet. If he were a young black guy in Detroit right now, with the evidence facing Kohberger, we wouldn't even be discussing whether or not the FBI went circuitous ways or whatever. But it's totally true. Makes sense to me. Yeah, what Howard just said.
Yeah, we're gonna get Fix back into the mix, but Howard and Jay, you both took a fair share of criticism. Jay, I remember before you were on my show, the first time people said, don't have this guy on. I said I was making the choice, and people after the fact said, I'm glad you had him on. He was a rational, kind of objectively thinking smart man, and I have no doubt that that's the case. But Amy here, Howard, I think it's wrong to write a book before the trial. You've been on the receiving end of some criticism. Your response to that comment?
Well, let me put so I can address all the criticism I've been receiving. I've been, personally attacked by the father of one of the victims, and my heart goes out to Steve Goncalves, who's attacked me. Any father who stands up and says you send your daughter off to college and she comes back to you and earn, well, again, as a father, as a human being, I'm deeply, deeply sorry for what he's had to go through. I also tried to portray him as a rather heroic figure, someone who refused to accept that the law enforcement authorities, that anyone but himself had a responsibility to get to the bottom of things. And he plows on, again, as a Shakespearean figure, trying to right every wrong, trying to get to the bottom of things. Many of his statements are now being used against him in the change of venue motion about his making so much publicity in the town. However, all that said, all that heartfelt sympathy and empathy I have for the families, there's another element in all of this. Jay has his book, I have my book. I don't think any of us have tried to buy the rights to any of the people. I thought about it. I was approached by lawyers involved, some of the families. Do I want to try to buy their rights for films or whatever? And it just didn't sit right for me. Not for any moral reasons, but largely because of my training. It's 12 years at the New York Times. It's just not something we do. It just didn't seem kosher. It just didn't seem right. However, I think a lot of the antagonism to writing about the book now is a people feeling in the town, close to the families, that they are losing an opportunity to make money from the deals that they hope to make from their book. Many of the families have sold their rights. They want that to be the book. The fact that my book, I say with some pride, became an instant New York Times bestseller, they're worried how that affects their commercial viability. I think there's room for lots of books, but maybe that's not my concern. But this sort of antagonism is a very dangerous thing. People close to HarperCollins involved in the distribution of my book and publicity have received death threats. They've had police outside people's houses because of this. And that's the sort of mania that led to this story in the first place. And I think things have gotten really out of hand. If you don't like the book, if you feel that there should only be a trial, that history can only be written once it's all over, from looking backwards, well, then don't buy the book. But I think a little bit of perspective is necessary.
Well, and Howard, have you personally received death threats?
People close to me at HarperCollins have told me, yes, that they've received death threats in my name, yes.
Wow. Are you taking any precautions? I don't think I've read or heard about this. Are you taking
I'm sort of going with the flow. We live in difficult times. I don't think I'd hire the Secret Service to protect me. But and
Well,
I'm not in a secluded bunker at this moment. But this is a volatile situation, and the volatile times that we're living in. And that people from HarperCollins literally had to get police officers over to their house, had to have police officers stationed in their driveways. And this is a book about a horrific crime, and the people who are responding to it are responding to it into a, to me, incomprehensible and horrific way.
Yeah,
and I don't want to. Ultimately, from the is not when I publish or when Jay published. I think ultimately, when you come down to it, it's a very materialistic decision that prompted all this antagonism. It was all about the money.
Let me say this. There should never be a death threat against any journalist, in my opinion. I'm a recovering journalist myself. But to threaten death for writing a book is just absolutely beyond any realm of understanding, at least in my world. That's insane. On the lighter side, I did write a book about my mother as a Holocaust survivor, and she did threaten to kill me, but no one else has. Sunshine here, back to Fix. And I don't know if Howard's reported that, but I'm actually blown away by that people at his publishing company, you just heard, have received death threats as well as him for writing this book. And Howard, as he just said, believes it has to do with the money, not necessarily with anything else.
Once it reached the New York Times bestseller list, it let loose the floodgates of antagonism.
By the way, every time you say New York Times bestseller list, it's like you're jabbing me in the heart a little bit every time. I'm trying to read. I'm trying to reach the Miami Beach bestseller list with my book. Did law enforcement check all possibilities? Did they rush? Fix, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we remember Moscow PD being thrown under the bus, that they're an incompetent, small little hick police department. They seem, by all accounts, to do a pretty damn good job. But this question of the timeline brings up this question as well, is did they check all possibilities? I can say this: there have been no murders since Bryan Kohberger has been incarcerated at the Latah County Jail. But what do you say, Kevin?
Did they rush? I think many people would point out that they felt like it took too long. And I actually sat down with now retired Moscow Police Chief James Fry, who's running for Latah County Sheriff. And I posed some of these questions. And while he talked about how there may have been some missteps, some discussions about, the targeting of the home or the targeting of individuals, or if they could guarantee that the community was safe, or whether, backtracking on some of those things before they caught somebody and they feel confident that Kohberger is the person, he wouldn't change anything. He said that they feel confident in the person they found. They believe they followed the right process. He called in the Idaho State Police almost immediately. I think it was within the day that the FBI was involved. He has some FBI training, having graduated from academy, some work that they do for local law enforcement, and he feels they took all the right steps and got their man. So, the question of did they rush or did they consider all possibilities? I think, and Howard's reporting and also Jay's reporting points out that they were grasping at straws perhaps originally and following every lead, and many leads that went nowhere, but they checked, rechecked, and ultimately through FBI assistance in the IGG process, the DNA through family tree development, they feel this is exactly the person. So did it take too long? They arrested him within 7 weeks. We have to remember that.
Yeah.
I think what they did do wrong, though, and before they knew all the details early on, Chief Fry, perhaps for the right reasons, perhaps because he was so emotionally involved, because he was a graduate, if I'm correct, of the university, his two daughters went there. He wanted to reassure the students at the university, the town, that there was nothing to worry about. He said he didn't use the terms targeted crime or crime of passion. I think that was said by the mayor, but he didn't really know if there was a serial killer on the loose. And he told them, you don't have to worry. And I think that was a bit of rashness that he should have avoided.
That is interesting. Yeah, and I remember Chief Fry obviously taking a lot of heat. Howard, there's a comment here. I truly believe that Bryan Kohberger is innocent from BBE. Maybe Brian's on his tablet in jail. But you were of the same opinion, Howard, from what I understand, for a very long time. It wasn't until the epilogue, I think, that you talk about how you do believe he is the correct suspect. You took a lot of heat for that as well, correct? What led you to say initially that you didn't think he was the man?
I did not say initially that he wasn't guilty. What I did say, and I'll reiterate today, is that every individual piece of evidence can be impugned. The dialectics of the courtroom mean for every authority, there's a counter authority. for everyone who says that this cell phone triangulation is really accurate, you'll find another authority who'll say this is junk science. However, when you take all the elements, when you take the cheek swab, for example, that was taken after his arrest, and that ties to the DNA, all of these things, even the turning off of the phone, even when you look at his alibi, where he's 2 hours just when this occurred off by himself, everything together coalesces into a coherent whole, which to me convinces me of his guilt. I also believe that Ann Taylor has a really good shot of getting him off. I think the article that Kevin wrote last week about the IgG evidence and being impugned, I think that's really important. I think you can still be not innocent and yet not be convicted of murder.
I'm not sure. I think the COE is muting and unmuting me because there's some little audio technicalities here. But Jay, I don't know if you wanted to add anything on to what Howard was just saying. What did you find in your own reporting in terms of writing this book about the innocence and or guilt of Bryan Kohberger as a suspect? I mean, we do live constitutionally by the old adage, presumed innocent until found guilty in a court of law. What was your take on this?
Well, it's so interesting. Howard and I have the same publisher. HarperCollins did both books. And I wasn't actually allowed to sort of provide any opinions. Probably because it was so new and very few people knew what would be the outcome of publishing something, obviously the book went through legal and everything like that. But anyway, there was some trepidation. I say this all the time. I'm a broken record at this point. If you look at all the evidence that the police have against Bryan Kohberger and law enforcement has against Bryan Kohberger, and I believe we have no reason in this instance to question law enforcement. Maybe some of the methodology, maybe some of the time frame stuff that we talked about. I'm not sure. Maybe Fixler's right that there's, or maybe I didn't read the article, but Bloom references it. Maybe there's an article I need to read fixed today, but about the possibility of some of this getting skewed in court and maybe thrown out or whatever. But I don't believe in this instance that the police approached this case with any sense of, with any intent of wrongdoing. Versus my first book, I'm not always like this. The Kill Jar was all about how the police buried and changed evidence and manipulated things and stuff. So I would call it as I see it at any point. I don't see any of that happening in this case. Maybe some of the FBI behind the scenes stuff that I don't know about. That said, this is the broken record part. If you took the evidence that they have against Kohberger, or at least that they're saying that they have against Kohberger, and you believe that they have no ill will, then Bryan Kohberger is going to get convicted for these crimes. If you use the same standard that you use for every other black kid in America, or any other person of color, or any other poor person, if this weren't the biggest case of the year in 2022, if this didn't have all the media attention, if this didn't have blah, 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 if Kohberger didn't look, handsome, if the victims didn't look attractive, if all this stuff, if you just say, hey, they got some kid in Chicago that murdered 4 people with a knife in this building, and here's what we got on him, nobody's questioning whether or not that kid goes to prison. They're only questioning it now because so many eyeballs are on this. What I'm getting at is, and maybe those eyeballs are deserved on every case. Maybe we're doing it, everything by the letter this time. Okay, well then that shows all the holes in all the other cases that we don't do by the letter. So which is it? Like, do you want to lock up people with this evidence or don't you? But the evidence looks like Kohberger did it. So of course I would believe, having studied the case, that Kohberger did it if what we're looking at is true, if it's been presented as true, truthfully. So yeah, I don't see any reason to let him off for this.
From Costas here for Kevin, hypothetical, this is a super chat. If the FBI identified Kohberger illegally, and they're known to have used IgG, which is investigative genetic genealogy, Kevin, can you speak? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the use of IgG, but if they used, listen, I'm no expert on this by any means, I'm going to talk about it generically, but if they use some sort of nefarious approach that is not kosher, to use Howard Bloom's word, What are the repercussions here from a legal standpoint with this case moving forward?
I'm also no lawyer, but I think the defense will attempt to have that evidence tossed, and they've been working toward that, saying that the DNA work is faulty or was not done above board. The prosecution has pointed out repeatedly, and this was a fight over even giving the IgG evidence produced by the FBI over to the defense, which the judge ultimately granted. But they pointed out, and Howard talked about it too, we have a direct match to the DNA evidence found on the knife sheath found at the crime scene, and it's the cheek swab of Bryan Kohberger. Before that, they had trash from the Kohberger residence, and they were able to match it to his father, Michael Kohberger, and the suspect, again, the DNA evidence left on the knife sheath connected directly to the male child of Michael Kohberger. He only has one male child, as far as we understand. So, in terms of your question or the viewer's question, I'm not sure tossing that method to which police consider a technique. They consider that a technique. It's the IgG has traditionally been used in cold cases. The Golden State Killer is one of the more prominent cases where that was used, and we are now seeing it used more consistently in active investigations. And the Kohberger case sort of sets a precedent nationally and including in court over that issue. But my opinion is, even if that were tossed, I think that there is enough DNA evidence that probably still connects Kohberger to the crime scene. Does that mean he committed the crime? Not necessarily. And that will be the job of his defense to put that case up.
Yeah, and this IgG is a real game changer. We've been covering the Rachel Morin case. Presumptive nominee Donald Trump invoked Rachel Morin's name at the RNC. I become tight with her family, who were not actually happy about that. At least part of her family was not happy about it, but they did use IgG to track down the Salvadorian killer who was responsible for another murder, by the way, in El Salvador. To this, I want to ask both Jay and Howard about the process. But before we get there, there was talk about, would they have some sort of alibi? And the defense did put forth an alibi. And I don't know if this is the correct quote, the exact quote, but Mr. Kohberger was out driving in the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022, as he often did, to hike and run and or see the moon and stars. I mean, Howard Bloom, I don't know how else to say this other than it sounds like a crock of what. What did you make of this alibi that he was just happened to be out driving, which gives them complete sort of immunity from the real facts in the case? Oh, you're muted now. Hang on a second. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Howard.
It's pretty much a desperation strategy. I think this alibi was actually the first one that they put forward, and then 9 months later they elaborate and they name the actual park, which is an unpronounceable Idaho name to me back here east, Wahihi Park, where he was there at 4 a.m. on a frigid, cloudy night, looking at the stars with his cell phone turned off, and no one can find him. I think if you really believed, and they go into court each time they're there, and Ann Taylor and her associates remark very vehemently about their client's innocence. Well, if you really believed he was innocent, you've come up with an alibi really early on in the case, not waited a year and a half. You have been telling the authorities to go find the man who really is, or the men or the people who are really responsible for these murders. I think what they're really doing now is a process of delay, and that alibi is just another attempt to buy time, and it's a very thin attempt. If that's the best they can come up with, I think their client is in real trouble, despite how often they say we believe in his innocence.
Yeah, and Ann Taylor is supposed to be a formidable, public defender, but that was weak sauce to me.
Kevin, what do you think of that? I'd love to hear Kevin on all this. He's the authority.
Yeah, Kevin, what do you think of that?
About the alibi?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's worth noting, and many of your listeners are probably not in Idaho, but Idaho has a requirement that if the defense is going to make an alibi argument at trial, they have to submit this documentation ahead of time pre-trial. So this is them sort of planting a flag that they intend to make this alibi argument. It's a requirement. The state asks the judge to compel the defense to provide that information, and they kind of gave an initial alibi. Even Judge called it a so-called alibi at one point. He granted them an extended period to bolster that argument, and that's where we ended up with the park that he may or may not have been around, and that he had taken cell phone photos in the month, not the day. They don't say in the alibi that he took photos the day of the crime, that in the month that he had prior photos of being in and around that park. So it's a requirement if they're going to put up that defense. And there will be a forthcoming, it has not been set yet, but a hearing where they will argue over whether or not this constitutes an alibi itself and whether or not it will be admissible during the trial.
We're going to stay tuned to that, and Kevin Fix will be on it for sure. From Wade Bird to Jay here. Jay, why is it not plausible that there was more than one attacker? Examining the timeline, it is rumored that Kaylee was beaten badly as well. How was there time to beat an unalive 4 within this time frame, which is, I believe it was like 15 minutes or less?
Let me back up just briefly and say that I think Kohberger's alibi actually places him squarely into the type of person that I suspected that he was when I first started researching Kohberger. He fits very, very tidily, or that portion of his life fits very tidily into like a Night Stalker profile. If, there's some survey that I read, it might have been in Dark Dreams, a book on criminology and stuff by 2 of these famous people. I forget their names, but you can look up Dark Dreams. Famous, but forget their names. Fixler started laughing at that. But it was something like 16 out of 20 Night Stalker murderers took extended night drives to quell the sort of friction in their mind. This is a common thing, to drive for hours and hours and hours. So when Kohberger says that's my alibi, to me, I just say, of course, because you probably do that all the time. I'm guessing that you do. In fact, the first draft of my book included him taking these extended long drives. That it was like too flowery, my description of it at the time, but it got cut. But that's in the first draft of my book, was Kohberger, me speculating, and we cut all the speculation at that point, but that he was this type of person. So when the alibi came out, I was sort of giggling to myself, because that's what I had thought that he would be doing, 10 months earlier when I was writing. So, I mean, to me, it doesn't make him a serial killer to take long drives. I take long drives too. That's kind of why I identified with that, because it quells the chaos, right? But in terms of the question so I think somebody needs to look into actually profiling. It's not gonna convict him, but it's of interest. Does he fit that profile too? It's of interest. Otherwise, they wouldn't have that in criminal studies, right? But back to the question from your person: how is it not possible that a second attacker was involved? And the unalived phrasing, obviously, this is somebody who spends a lot of time online, because people have started saying that online to I think beat the censors or something.
Yeah, it's a YouTube algorithm But
I mean, I don't think it's not possible, but I do think that they didn't pin something on Kohberger. I think it's possible there's another person. Sure, maybe they have nothing on that person. Then the question becomes, well, maybe that other person dropped the knife or whatever. You start the sheath or whatever. But I don't know. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I certainly don't think that the police.
I'm saying it's not possible.
And how come, Howard? How come?
I think by now you would have first found a more complex motive. You would have seen more cars in the area. You would have seen a blood trail. It just doesn't make sense. I can't remember who said that the people fought back and that he beat someone savagely. I haven't uncovered that in my reporting, that they were stabbed savagely. Kaylee particularly, that she tried to fight back a little, but he did not beat her. I haven't uncovered that. But I think if there were more people involved, if there were a band of criminals, there'd be more information. We wouldn't have this paucity of events. And an irrational crime would perhaps start to make sense. There'd be a reason behind it that would be exposed by now. And I don't think that has become true. That's
I also think that it's probable that there's more evidence against Kohberger than we know. There's no reason that we would have had to have known everything. The probable cause document that most of us base a lot of this on is it only required the minimum to meet probable cause for his arrest or for searches and stuff. They didn't have to put everything in there, and it's been many months now since that. So I think what's more likely is that there's more evidence against Kohberger. Maybe I'm just guessing, but it is, a lot of people online bring up really serious questions like, how the hell did he get in and out of there and have an apartment and have a vehicle and have a massive digital footprint potentially, but leave no other evidence really, except for that little tracy little speck of possible DNA evidence under the sheath, right? Like, yeah. So everybody then speculates, was he in a murder suit? Was his car murder wrapped? Was his house murder wrapped? It's like, this is a lot to get rid of. The amount of blood that comes from 4 bodies is so extensive. I talked to Michael Baden. This is the last I'll say. The
forensic pathologist.
Yeah, and my assumption is there's blood everywhere. And he says, well, not if everybody's laying on their back, because the blood will pool inside. But that's not the case here. So there's blood everywhere. Kohberger gets into his car. He goes back to, eventually to his apartment, blah, blah, blah. Like there's a million ways that blood could be anywhere. And to think that they don't have more than just that touch DNA is really something to me. Maybe they don't. I mean, I don't know, but it's to me, it's more possible that they have a lot more against Kohberger.
Yeah, we're gonna have to wait for the trial to see if that evidence comes out. We did have Dr. Gary Mercado and the legend Dr. Ann Burgess on the show, and they profiled him. This was prior to catching him. They profiled him pretty accurately. Howard Bloom, you did mention you don't think it's more than one perpetrator because of, one of the things you mentioned, which is simply amazing, which is what Jay just mentioned, is that there's literally like no blood trail after 4 people are stabbed to death. How, in your opinion, is that remotely possible? What happened here?
I believe, and I detail this in the book, and basically he entered the kitchen sliding door on the 2nd floor. He walks by the 2 bedrooms there. He seems to be on a mission on a single path going up the stairs to the 3rd floor, goes into the bedroom, and there he finds what I believe is his target, Maddie. He's surprised to find Kaylee is also there. She becomes, in effect, collateral damage when she fights back, when he has to deal with this. His plans go out the window. The knife sheath is left on the bed. He walks down the stairs, trying to exit. At this point, he's confronted by Ethan. Ethan dies quickly. He then tells Zaina, don't worry, words to the effect, don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you, or it'll all be okay. He then attacks her. There are defensive wounds, I've been told, on her hands. He then leaves after killing these 4 people in just about a matter of minutes, 8 or 9 minutes, I think is the timeline. He then sees Dylan. He doesn't see Dylan. Dylan rather sees him. She sees this man in the black mask, bushy eyebrows. She's locked in her state of fright. If she had found the will to scream, if she had challenged him, I think that would have pulled him from the manic state that he was in. It would have penetrated his, let's say, his armory of hate, and she too would have died. But it was her silence that saved her. And then it leads to one of the biggest mysteries of this entire perplexing drama. Why does she go back into her room and then for the next 8 hours not notify anyone?
This part of it is very perplexing, and tough to figure out. But you heard there, Howard Bloom has hypothesis on the order of the murders. Back to Kevin Fixler. One of the big problems, I think, for all three of you, there's a gag order that's still in place. Kevin, to this day, how is this making your life difficult in terms of getting information?
Well, there's no information to be gotten, right? It's sort of ancillary information that kind of leaks out from time to time. But what it means is that we all are relying on the court records primarily in order to detail new information, write new stories about what's going on. And, occasionally there's something that percolates, somebody who is from one of the individuals, whether it's the victim or Kohberger's past, will perk up, or we'll get some new detail. And, the internet sort of goes wild again when somebody gets it, and then you have a lot of pile-on press trying to either get the same person or report on a report. So from that capacity, I'll tell you this: I think the gag order has been effective, and what they have sought, that's not ideal for media and us trying to present more information or people who write books, but it has been, I think, effective in that regard in terms of trying to maintain, to the extent they can, an impartial jury across the state.
And I would argue that the gag order is dangerous for the truth. When the authorities are not talking about what happened, when they're not providing reporters like Kevin at daily newspapers with the facts, well, then you have a vacuum that's filled with fatuous speculation. Sometimes downright evil grudges are exposed on the internet. It makes it the Wild West. And I think the authorities needed to share this information. And the fact that a book would be published beforehand is not going to prejudice the case. It's a lack of facts, a lack of verifiable information that will ultimately prejudice the case. I mean, I want the FBI to be hauled on the carpet if they found as I claim, and my sources have told me, that they've identified Kohberger as a person of interest early on. I want to know if they used genetic information that they did not have legal access to. I think we should know this now rather than wait for this all to fall apart in the courtroom.
But we do know that information, Howard. It's included in court records now.
We don't know if the FBI used 23andMe, for example, to access the genetic information. That's what I mean. If they did that, if they use that, which they are not allowed to use to get to Kohberger, then even the cheek swab, which you and I think are convinced that that's pretty damning, well, that could be thrown out too. The poisonous pen or whatever, the poisonous limb of the tree will damn all this evidence. And I think that's important. And that should be out now. The public should have access to this.
That's going to be interesting. I think GEDmatch is the one that they're allowed to use, but we're going to find out. Conspiracy theorists have made it into STS Nation. Optum says this is not Kevin Fixler, followed by it looks like Kevin Fixler, but this is not Kevin Fixler. We have actually created a Kevin Fixler hologram. I spent $3.8 million of my own money to perfect it and bring him on the show today. So you are, in fact,
check my
correct.
DNA.
Yes, he has no DNA. He's a hologram. Here's a look. Howard Bloom took heat. He talked about it from Stephen Gonzalez, the family of Kaylee Gonzalez, and this is the direct quote from the family. It says, "Mr. Bloom's book, in our opinion, is fiction. We have never spoken with Mr. Bloom about the contents of his book. As a seasoned writer, Mr. Bloom has learned to write in a way that as long as he claims his information came from a source, he is protected. But all this book does is tell a story," in all caps, by Mr. Bloom, "a version made up by him relying on sources that have no responsibility or duty to speak the truth. Just another book and another dollar to be made on the deaths of 4 young college students. Thank you again for your support of our family, and we appreciate all of your thoughts and prayers." The statement is right there. Howard, I've got to let you respond to this.
Sure. Well, let me reiterate something I said earlier on in this show. My heart goes out to Mr. Goncalves. He lost his daughter. They all lost children. Also, I tried to speak with him. He didn't want to speak with me. He made his own independent deal with a journalist where he got money for it. He got money for it. Fine, let him make as much profit as he wants. But I did try to speak with him, and I stated specifically in my articles and in the book that I did not speak with him. I did, however, quote statements he made on the internet. I did quote statements that he made to the press. I did quote statements he made in lengthy interviews. He's never disputed any of those statements. What he doesn't like, and he has a right not to like it, is that I wrote a book. The book has seemed to have found an audience, and I think he's worried about what he's going to write will find an audience too. I think that's what all this is about. But there's not one specific thing that he says in my book that is wrong. There's nothing that he points out. There's no specifics. I'm sure he can find things perhaps, but he doesn't really care about that. What he cares is he's lost the opportunity, he feels, to tell and to sell his story. Because I was approached by his lawyer about trying to make a deal for film rights.
Sadly, sometimes it does come down to the almighty dollar. Your heart's got to go out to all these families. Ethan Chapin's mom, Stacy Chapin, was at CrimeCon. She made it a point to say that these are, human beings obviously lost, as I said, way too soon. And Steve Gonzalez has been very vocal, as has his wife and daughter. And you know what? I don't begrudge them at all. If it was my child, I
also add to that.
Yeah.
If I can say, I try to create Steve Goncalves as a hero, someone who's refusing to sit back, to passively allow his daughter's killer to possibly escape. He's almost like a Captain Ahab. He wants to just get to the bottom of it. He's not going to give up. And to me, that's a very heroic figure. And I was able to take the statements he made to the press, the statements he's made in many online interviews, and he has literally thousands of texts he sent to people involved in this case and use that to portray him. I think a reporter has a right to take substantiated statements from people and to use them to recreate what was said.
Yeah, and I think this is a very difficult part of journalism, is you want to get to the story, but it's always a fine line in respecting the family. And I'll just say, from SGS Nation's point of view, Steve Gonzalez, you have an open platform here, and my heart aches for you and your family. I cannot imagine the pain that you or the other families are going through. Jay Rubin, in speaking about getting to the families, I know that's something that's been difficult for all three of you guys. When you wrote the book, what was it like for you in reaching out to the families and the reaction that you got from them?
It was difficult. I had a 4-month turnaround time for the first draft of my book. So I was writing when everything was just really brand new, the book came out, I don't know what it is, 8 months ago now, or 10 months ago now, or something, which means that it was done. We're talking almost a year and a half ago. It was quick. It was quick, and
it reads really well. I'll say it's a really sustained narrative. It's a very good read.
There you go.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But it was, I was doing the research in the midst of everybody doing their research, right? So when I was trying to call the families, they were getting inundated, hundreds of calls every week. And I was able to speak to Christy Gonsalves. I spoke to Stacy Chapin. I spoke to, I was able to speak to a representative, basically, of each family. And Ben Mogan and Xana's a very close family friend of Xana spoke to me extensively, and but I can say that it was really difficult. I got a lot of pushback. And particularly, I'm not necessarily a true crime writer. This just happened accidentally. I wrote one book about a case that mattered to me, And then here I was in Idaho when this happened, and this case mattered to me. And Harper wanted an Idaho person to write this book, and with the first book, and I just kind of landed in this position writing this book. Right, my daughter had went to the University of Idaho. There were lots of tentacles between my friends and the University of Idaho. Boise and Moscow are very tightly tied through the university affiliation, and so. I'm not somebody who chases down crime stories usually. So it was actually very psychologically and emotionally difficult for me to know that I was, emailing and text messaging and sending DMs and making telephone calls and knocking on doors, knowing that these were the people that were suffering in my own community, whose friends of friends are, I saw Jack DeCour in a coffee shop. All of these people are in my world. I was telling somebody I was writing this book, and they happen to be friends with one of the families. You just don't know here in Boise. So it's actually very difficult for me. But eventually people talked a little bit, just enough to sort of piece together some stuff that helped me a lot. I've had a lot of people say things like that Howard's getting, or in the first months before publication, I had people saying, sending, I wouldn't say death threats, but sending really hostile messages, calling me, swearing at me and things like that. And I'm naturally paranoid anyway, because I'm a private investigator. So I've got one hand on my hip here, and I've got one hand on my hip, and I've got one hand here, and I'm like, scoping out, and I'm like mentally. And so it's tough. What Howard says he's going through, it's tough. I went through that for months and months, and I will say that luckily I had the opportunity to give a big talk with Kevin, moderated it, and there were a couple hundred people there, a sold out place in Boise, and that I think that was like a platform to let people see the type of person I am, and that sort of chatter about me quieted after that platform was given. And but it's tough, man. I do not like getting hate mail, and because it brings out the worst in you as well. Yeah, so it's difficult. But I think Howard mentioned early on in this that's indicative of the chaos surrounding this story to begin with. That's par for the course for this story. You say one thing on the internet and 10,000 people are talking about it 30 seconds later. It's craziness, and so that is wild.
Don't. There's a ghost somewhere on this show. I keep hearing it through there's a weird reverb with the mic. But don't ever host a YouTube show, especially not about the Karen Reed trial, if you don't want hate mail. I'm still getting it in droves.
But I want to finish and just say I also get love mail, for this book. And I think Howard probably does too. There's something about I know I can speak from my own experience, which is that I've gotten many people that say things to me. I've had hundreds and hundreds of emails or whatever, DMs or whatever, saying, I was suspicious of you. I didn't think this book should be written. I'm glad you wrote it. Those kids need a voice. And that's the way this will shake out in the end, I think. It's one thing to say these families are mourning, and they're mourning in a way that none of us wants to understand. But I think very few of us go toward this because we want to exploit, because we want to, we're writers. We can, I can no sooner stop writing than to be extreme, than these murderers can stop murdering, right? This is my thing, right? So if you say to a writer who's touched by something, don't write about that, it's exploitive, then you have to say you don't believe in the arts. You don't believe in writers. Then you have to call up Kevin Fixler and threaten his life. You have to call up CNN and threaten their life. You have to call up, we are just doing the thing that we do. And we're not, if we go to it with an open heart, then there's nothing exploitative about it. We're just extracting experience from human existence and reporting on horrific things the way a New York Times reporter or whoever reports on war. It's the same thing. We're just going to that thing with the skill set that we have, and we're trying to make sense of it.
Yeah. Howard, there've been some all valid points, and I agree with you on that from a journalistic standpoint. You're never going to stop journalists from journalisming. But Howard, been a couple of questions about this informant, I guess connected or related somehow to Steve Gonzalez. What is that all about? Oh, you're muted again. I don't know why that keeps happening. You're unmuted now.
It's not just Steve who has talked about there being an informant.
Mm-hmm.
Both the prosecution and the defense last spring made references to there being a confidential informant in the case, that there could not be all the discovery information revealed, because if this information was revealed, then it could put someone in jeopardy. And the prosecution, Bill Thompson, actually used the phrase confidential informant when talking to the court. Who is this confidential informant? What does it involve? That's one of the mysteries that I think will be resolved at the trial. Have you heard about this, Kevin, too?
Kevin, yeah. Kevin, anything on this?
No, not on my side.
No, there you go. Kevin,
confidential.
Yeah, it's confidential. It's confidential informant. But Kevin, you and I think Howard did this as well. But you went out, Kevin, to Pennsylvania, rural Pennsylvania, not far from the Poconos, which is where Bryan Kohberger's home is still. What was that experience like? And I think you approached or tried to approach Michael Kohberger, the father. How did that wind up for you? And then I'll ask Howard the same question.
Sure. I got out there in January of 2023, so it was just shortly after Bryan Kohberger's arrest. And at that time, I mean, it was still a community that was, I think, in such shock. And it's that's a term that gets thrown around, and Jay's talked about the impact in Idaho, whether it's Moscow or Boise or just the state in total. But you really just had a sense of people trying to make sense of this. It just, these people lived a mile from where this considerable FBI and state police raid occurred. And Howard does a really nice job of describing details about the arrest of Kohberger on December 30th in the early morning hours that nobody else to this point has had that level of narrative and detail. So I found that extremely interesting in his book. But it was just a place just still trying to come to terms with the fact that this person who grew up in their community, was alleged to have committed this crime. In terms of trying to reach the Kohberger family, nobody has really done that, or if they have, through their attorney. It's been denials or statements, things like that. There was an initial statement issued by Kohberger's public defender out there in Pennsylvania. And it's a secure neighborhood where the Kohbergers now live. I visited the home that they previously owned and spoke to some neighbors. And they told me about growing up with Bryan and, their experiences, including going to high school and grade school with him. But there's a security gate, and the ethics of journalism dictate you wouldn't sneak in or hop over the fence or some of those things. I think I've seen some other media outlets that don't abide by some of those rules. And so reaching the Kohbergers or even the neighbors of their little community there in Albrightsville, that was not something I had any success with.
Yeah. By the way, Howard talks about Maddie being targeted, which is important, and I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But Howard, your success or lack thereof in trying to connect with Michael Kohberger, the family of Bryan Kohberger.
Well, I did also spend a good deal of time, several trips to Pennsylvania and that area. What I did is sort of the reverse of what the FBI did. What the FBI did is they took a piece of DNA and then they built out the limbs of a family tree till they reached, they believe, the man responsible for the murders, Bryan Kohberger. I went in reverse. I tried to get relatives in the Kohberger family, worked my way back, who would speak, and eventually I found people and relatives who gave me some insight. I also, for example, spending time, Kevin talked about how I was able to talk about the night of the arrest. Well, I was able to get people in Pennsylvania who worked with the state police before. What the state police do, interestingly enough, which I didn't know before I went out there, is they help local merchants collect bills. If people haven't paid their bills for fuel delivery or something else, the state police often help them get the money. So the merchants knew state police, who were then at the local barracks for Troop 9, which was involved in the arrest, and that allowed me to make some connections there. So by putting out all these different sort of feelers, I was able to make some contact. In many ways, my book is structured about what happens between Kohberger and his father in this trip across America. As Kohberger is sitting next to him in a white Hyundai Elantra, he knows, he goes out there, as it was explained to me, knowing that the murders were close to his son's home, 9 or 10 miles away. He knows that the police at this point are looking for a white Hyundai Elantra. Oh my gosh, he's sitting in a white Hyundai Elantra next to his son, who he knows has some problems. And in the course of this journey, Kohberger, the father, is fighting back the realization that, oh my gosh, my son could be a monster.
By the way, here's one of the love notes here. Howard, your book was very well written, and he's putting the glasses on for this one. And I noticed the subtleties of big information in the foreground of the bigger story. Thank you for writing from a fellow writer. I'll tell you this, having gone
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Having gone through it myself, it is not an easy thing to do, to write a book. It's still for me, an outer body experience. I have no idea how I did it.
And that's why when anyone accuses someone of being a grifter for writing a book, well, that's someone who's never written a book or probably never even read one. We all know it's, Kevin's written a couple of books, Jay has written a couple of books. It's hard work. And this is my 16th published book. You find subjects that interest you, and then you hope you can find a way of telling them. You hope you construct a narrative that will keep you occupied and involve the reader too, and make the story go.
Yeah, it is.
And you hope that Kevin doesn't find out too many facts you got wrong.
So let's get to Maddie. Howard's kind of becoming the Howard Bloom show right now, but we'll get to the other guests as well. It's your contention that he basically spotted Maddie at the Mad Greek restaurant, I think in Moscow, which is a place that has vegan options. Bryan Kohberger, known to be a strict vegan. I don't know what the hell he's eating in jail for the last couple of years, but tell us a little more. Why do you think it was Maddie specifically, not Kaylee or not Xana or any of the others?
First, you have to go back to a little earlier on that night when he's seen going, or a white Hyundai is seen going by the house 3 times. People say and have written that he was scouting the house. I don't believe he was scouting the house. I believe that the person driving that car was trying to find the will to become the monster he was thinking about becoming, trying to find the will to cross into the realm of the murders. If he had been scouting the house, he would have seen that the driveway was full of cars. He would have seen that at 4 a.m. there was a Jack in the Box delivery, as Kevin points out, not a Burger King delivery, to the house, and he wouldn't have gone in that night. But he was just locked in his own mania. And I believe when you follow his path through the house, as I described it before, he goes directly up to the 3rd floor and he goes into one bedroom, Maddie's bedroom. And he's surprised that there's someone else there. He hadn't realized that Kaylee was there. She wasn't necessarily living at the house. Most of that term she'd been Coeur d'Alene, and he was surprised to see her. She'd just come down to show off her new Range Rover. And both the one thing the prosecution and defense seem to agree on at this point is that there was no interaction between Kohberger and any of the suspects. They say he never talked to them. He never even followed them online, didn't follow them on social media. However, despite their saying that, I believe, and again, I'm just speculating on this part, that he must have seen Maddie when he went to the Mad Greek. I know he was in the Mad Greek. I have people who've told me that. Were words exchanged? I don't know if they were necessarily necessary in someone like Kohberger. He was a man, an individual where obsessions became easily to him. The former heroin addict, the man who was able to beat heroin, the former sort of poor student who works his way into a great institution and is a teaching assistant in a graduate program in criminology at Washington State University. The man who's able to lose 125 pounds when he makes his mind up ideas become fixed in it. And for some reason, whether it's Maddie's beauty, her exuberance, her vitality, she became fixed in his mind. And I also believe he came to the conclusion that it was too complicated to live in this world with her presence as a rebuke to him. He could not survive if she was going to be in the world at the same time. That's not an argument that might not make sense to anyone, but I think it made sense to Kohberger in his mad monster way. And he went there that night to her bedroom on a mission to murder her. Once he parked his car and walked down the hill with the knife in his hand and made his way through the kitchen door, he was on a mission to kill, but just to kill one person, and everyone else became collateral damage grimly.
There's an argument that the Mad Greek is allegedly saying that he never was there, as far as they know. Also, that it's not a vegan restaurant. I think there are vegan options. So
they're vegan options, yeah.
Not even splitting hairs. But Jay, let you weigh in on this. And also, was it your belief that he was targeting Maddie here?
First of all, the Mad Greek is to say it's a vegan option restaurant, which I have said at times as well until I ate there. They had a couple of things that are considered vegan. One of them is rice. So like, I'm not kidding. Like that was actually under the vegetarian list or whatever was rice. So like, this is not, there are more vegan options at almost any restaurant in a major city. This is not, I mean, they had a Greek salad. It's called the Mad Greek. I ate their Greek salad. And I love the people there and I love the place, but frankly, it wasn't even that decent of a Greek salad. I come from Detroit where there's a huge Greek population. So like, this is not a place that we should ever anymore start to talk about as like Mediterranean or vegetarian or whatever. It's just a restaurant and they're good people and they gave great service. And I actually spoke to one of the servers there and I quote her in my book. So he could have met her anywhere. Maybe he met her at Mad Greek. She did work there, and if the source says that that's where he met her, then that he did meet her there at some point, then there's no reason to doubt that because he goes to restaurants. She worked in one, but I would have come out with a little bit more stronger assessment of my thoughts about Maddie being the target. And I honestly, but I wasn't allowed to really with Harper, but we were working on such a quick time frame. I think they just gave me some restrictions because we just had to bang something out that was as accurate as we possibly could, you know? And that makes sense. But my feeling, I mean, if you talk to, this is stereotyping of American beauty or whatever you want to call it. If you look at those people and they're in a lineup and you say, which one do you think Kohberger, just as a gut reaction, which one do you think he became obsessed with? It's probably Maddie. She was the one who just sort of, you know, they're all beautiful. All of our children are beautiful. We never want to say any child is not. And these four were beautiful by American standards as well, right? But Maddie just had this like almost angelic sparkle, and you think, of course. And I believe that I mean, I say this to an extent in my book, but I say this all the time on podcasts and interviews and stuff. Where while Idaho Slept couldn't say it, I say it constantly that I believe that this, if Kohberger did it, that it was a revenge killing. And you say, what is a revenge killing? Well, and it's what Howard alludes to. Really, it's like it could be nothing. I mean, we don't even think of it the way we think of revenge is not the way a revenge killer thinks of revenge. It's he was slighted. He had a history of being slighted. He has decades of being not fitting in with women and struggling with that. And these slights, he was not necessarily a talented person. I don't even think he's a talented intellect, but he's diligent. And the diligence is a byproduct of obsession in some ways, right? And I believe that he could have had this just the most minute slight from Maddie and obsessed and couldn't find a way to have the two of them existing in this world, and that revenge motif or whatever kicks in at that point. And I mean, it makes sense, you know. Do we know? No, but is that seems to be a viable speculation? And I pretty much say the same thing in the book about how Kohberger's path to the top floor and all that. That all makes total sense. I think that the other people were byproducts of this horrific obsessive thing. I mean, everybody who knew him that we could find to talk, except for old cronies from junior high or whatever, have said that that he's a trippy dude. And a little vein of darkness ran beneath, and it all makes sense to me. There's no surprises here.
And we see, excuse me, that traffic stop in Pullman, Washington, with that female officer, and his behavior is odd to say the least, as he's arguing about stopping properly or not.
No, he's
in
not.
The intersection.
His behavior is not odd. I know this is what you're saying, but this is not odd for his personality type.
No,
right?
no, right.
He has to be right, or
correct,
or F you. And there's this obsessive nature of feeling like he's been slighted somehow. Like why are you pulling me over for this obviously small issue of encroaching on the law, and and it makes sense. You look at Kohberger, his whole pattern all throughout his life. He's not particularly talented. He's just manipulative, obsessive, driven. He like Howard mentions, the heroin addict from being 100 pounds overweight to losing 100 pounds on his own with no help, or 120 pounds or whatever it was, to getting on heroin and going full bore with it. You look at pictures of him on heroin, he looks like the picture of a heroin addict because he went all in. When you look at him as healthy, he looks like the picture of a healthy person. When you look at him as a PhD, he looks like a PhD.
Yeah, for sure. Courtney's saying, Joel, this middle of the day stuff is messing with my schedule. We did that because Carm, myself, the COE, the kids, we're going to be at Books and Books in Coral Gables for a book signing tonight. If you're in the Miami area, please come out. One final thing, then we'll get closing thoughts here. This is interesting. So as we know, Bryan Kohberger was a PhD student at the University of Washington, got his master's from DeSales in Pennsylvania, where very famous Catherine Ramsland in the true crime world is a professor. She's written famously a book about BTK. Well, it turns out that Howard Bloom writes that Catherine Ramsland was in touch with the Kohberger family shortly after their son's arrest. What do we know about that? She has not spoken publicly about this at all since this, as far as I know, but she has not spoken publicly about this particular case. How did you get that information, but what do you know about that information, Howard?
Well, I know basically what I wrote. She has not spoken to me, and she has made it clear that she won't speak to me. She's at least told me that in several emails. However, he did call up the family after the arrest. Kohberger's mother was very glad and very heartened to take the call. She did, at that point, Kohberger was in jail in Pennsylvania. He was debating whether or not to allow himself to be extradited to Idaho to stand trial or to fight the extradition hearing. Catherine Ramsland advised the family to allow him to be extradited because she said it would happen eventually. The family did just that. She has also been in contact with the mother, and I think Miss Kohberger's mother passes on information, I've been told, from Catherine Ramsland to Bryan in jail.
This is J. Reuben Appelman's book. You see it right there, While Idaho Slept. He's also the author of The Kill Jar. He's a private investigator, an all-around good guy who took some heat for just writing this book, but he's an author, and that's what authors do. They write. J. Reuben, your final thoughts on this? We're now less than a year away, unless there's some sort of continuance, less than a year away from this trial. STS will be there. I'm going to be working on getting my Airbnb in place. You planning a follow-up book, and your thoughts moving forward?
I'm not planning to follow a book. I'm planning to just sit with the case. This is a lot to process for a long time with these being entrenched in this case. Like, I guess let me back up and say, you write a book and you're always associated with that book, right? You write about the murders, you're always associated with the murders. It happened with the kill jar. It's been 8 years now since that book came out, and I'm still inundated by emails and stuff with the kill jar. And it's difficult because you didn't write the book to necessarily, swim in those murders for the rest of your life, so to speak, or swim in the blood of those murders more eloquently. I guess right now I'm just reaching out emotionally to the families. I'm just saying, like, to anybody I can, this was a hard thing to do. I feel for them. I have no idea what they're going through. I don't want to know what they're going through necessarily. To know it would be to live through that, and that's really difficult. What's next for me is I'm doing a lot of PI work. I have to jump from this in 2 minutes and go do a surveillance. And I'm just trying to, Howard's more experienced, 16 books. I don't know. We should have this conversation sometime. But the emotional and psychological toll of digging into this dark stuff for me lingers in a way that I feel somehow akin to these crimes now, or akin to the emotional impact of these crimes. That won't go away from me. What's next for me, the real answer is I've been doing a lot of yoga and push-ups and trying to be healthy so that I can get on to the next book, and it's like this shit fucks with you a little bit, and I'm just trying to be a real person still somehow, and not turn into a monster.
Yeah, well, you're no monster. Jay Rubin, good luck with the surveillance. I'm going to bounce you out just so you don't have to
Thanks, you
stress
guys.
about
Thanks for having me, Howard.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you. Good luck, Jay.
In the future.
Yeah,
Kevin,
thank
Yes,
you.
please.
Thank you. Howard Bloom, for those who do not know, is an American author, a journalist. He was with the Village Voice. This whole time, Howard, I worked for a summer for Michael Moore in 1999, and he had a Village Voice investigative reporter who was the coolest dude I ever met, who was helping Michael. Michael did crazy things, still does, but he was trying to negotiate some peace treaty in Northern Ireland as part of his show, and he brought on this. The guy's name was Jim something. It's going to come to me, and I'm going to email you about it, but he was a really very interesting guy. But anyway, Howard Bloom was with the Village Voice and the New York Times. He is the New York Times bestselling author of this book, When the Night Comes Falling, but also American Lightning. Howard, thank you for being here tonight, and just your final thoughts as we head out here.
Well, I appreciate your having me. What I do in all my books and all my reporting is I try to tell stories involving characters, and this was a story that grabbed me. If you see the subtitle of the book is a requiem for the Idaho student murders, and I wanted this book not just to be a compelling drama, a compelling police investigation, a story of a compelling manhunt, but I wanted it to be a fitting memorial for the students who lost their lives way too young. One of the things I thought about a lot when I was writing the book was Zaina at her high school graduation, or had a mortarboard, a graduation cap, where she had written, "For the lives I will change. For the lives I will change." And the fact that she will never get to change these lives, that none of the victims will ever get to change these lives, was something that stuck with me as I wrote this book. And I wanted to tell a story, create a drama that did justice to the lives they lived.
Yeah, well put. Confirming the time, we're going to be doing a members only live show on Sunday. We are kind of bolstering and building the Patreon platform. That helps us a lot. We're putting out just tons and tons and tons of content. Oh, thanks for this. Look at the COE put this up. Kind of a best of the book signing and family here. You got Scott Duffy on the bottom right, retired FBI. Then you got the living legend Ann Burgess, top right. Carmen I, bottom left, will be at Books and Books tonight. And then the Familia, some pictures at Crime Con. You see it all. My kids gave me an amazing, somehow they stacked themselves up sideways and took a black and white photo and presented that to me. And they baked me a chocolate cake for my birthday, of which I ate half this morning. And unlike Jay Rubin, I'm not doing enough push-ups to be doing that. So back to the gym for me. The last guy to say goodbye to here, two-time Idaho Reporter of the Year. That is Kevin Fixler. This is the hologram. It's not the real Kevin Fixler. That person has been going on, by the way, that it is definitely not you. So we're going with that. This is the greatest American conspiracy. Howard Bloom has got the rights to the book and the movie, and he's working on Who is the Real Kevin Fixler. That will be the title. Will the real Kevin Fixler please stand up? Will be the title. He's been following this from day one. Fix, you probably can't tell us what you're working on next. Are you working on something next? And what are you looking out for as we move ahead in this case?
Yeah, I'm just the local grunt in terms of writers, and congrats to Howard on his book, and also to Jay. I would encourage people to pick them both up. They're both really well done, and I know there's some critiques about a book before a trial and things like that, but both men took their jobs and responsibilities to heart, and again, I would encourage everybody to pick those up if they're looking for information on the case. In terms of me, I mentioned August 29th is the scheduled hearing in Moscow for the arguments for the change of venue. I would be surprised if Judge makes a determination right there. Again, specifically, Kohberger's attorneys are seeking to move this to Boise, the Latah County Courthouse, including because there's a much larger juror pool, and they wrote in their document that they feel it gives Kohberger the best chance at an impartial jury. So we'll see if that happens, if Judge makes that decision. And as a quick side note, if that does happen and that's granted, then Judge makes the decision on whether or not he continues with the case. But it is understood he likely would, and would be a surprise if he were to drop the case. From there, as you noted, Joel, June 2nd, 2025 is the current scheduled date for what should be a 14-week trial, which would run till August 29th of 2025. It's here in Boise. It will be a mad dash by many in the media to get here. Perhaps Howard will be here. I know Jay, as a resident, will be here.
I will be there.
If it stays in Moscow, it will be a zoo. It's a very small community, a very small courthouse. I don't have an opinion yet on whether or not it will be moved, but speaking with local attorneys here in the community, they think it would be a no-brainer to move it for any number of reasons, including the goal of impartiality and a fair trial, both in the hopes from the state and also from Kohberger's defense.
Thank you to April the 1st, watching the channel every day. Thank you for that. And look, I'm not envious at all that Howard Bloom has a New York Times bestseller right out of the gates, because look, I got this. Jimmy McNutty, the boy was born this morning. I'm naming him Joel. I bet you Howard Bloom has no butterflies named after him. This is my kindred spirit. Jimmy, if you could put this thing in a jar with some holes and FedEx it to me. I have no idea if anyone happens to know how long a butterfly lives, but I'm a huge lover of animals. I will gently caress its wings, and I will introduce it to Fred and Ethel. If you're not following Fred and Ethel on Instagram, you're missing out. Fred Ethel STS. Loved having these guests here today. Tomorrow, we're jumping into the Ashley Benefield trial with Phil and Scott at 5 p.m. Eastern time. And we're back to some evidence in the Donna Adelson trial next week. We're at it before Carmen and I head to Atlanta, and then Los Angeles with the kiddos for some other book signings. Guests, please stick around. Howard Bloom, I want to ask you a quick question, so stick around. And love you, America. Love you, Idaho. Love you, New York. And let's remember the victims in this case: Kaylee Gonzalez, Anna Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, and of course, Maddie Mogan as we close out the show. That's what it's all about. These four absolutely beautiful kids with their entire lives ahead of them, and were taken from us way too soon. We'll see you tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern time. Guests, stick around.